Good morning. Happy Wednesday of Holy Week, or happy Eve of Passover. Today we want to take a look at crime. Right? We already took a look at Hegel's view of war, and of course, needless to say, for Hegel, war is not simply something negative, it is also positive. Similarly, crime is, for Marx, is something productive. Let's take a look at what he says. A philosopher produces ideas. We're supposed to produce something. A poet, verses. A parson, sermons. A professor, textbooks. And a criminal is also a productive member of society. The criminal produces crime. But in the relation between this latter branch of production and the whole productive activity of society is examined a little more closely, one is forced to abandon a number of prejudices. The criminal produces not only crime, he also produces criminal law, because new forms of crime will demand new laws. The criminal produces the professor who delivers lectures on this criminal law, lectures in law school, in criminal justice departments, and even the inevitable textbook in which the professor presents his lectures as a commodity for sale in the market. There results an increase of material wealth. In other words, crime adds to material wealth of the society, quite apart from the pleasure which the author himself derives from the manuscript of this textbook. Further, the criminal produces the whole apparatus of the police, the judicial system, detectives, judges, prison guards, juries. Juries, of course, get paid per diem for serving on the jury. And all these different professions which constitute so many categories of the social division of labor. Develop diverse abilities of the human spirit, create new means and ways of satisfying them. We're on page 159. Torture itself has provided occasions for the most ingenious mechanical inventions, employing a host of honest workers in the production of these instruments. Thumb screws. The rack. Remember, there was a time in English jurisprudence when testimony that was not given under torture was not believed to be reliable. So there was a benefit to using torture to ensure that the witness, or the criminal, was telling the truth. The criminal produces an impression now moral, now tragic, and renders a service by arousing the moral and aesthetic sentiments of the public. It's published in the newspaper. Hegel, of course, maintained that the daily newspaper, is the secular man's spiritual reading, in the sense that he reads all these terrible things that people, criminals especially, do, and then he, after finishing reading all the bad things that went on in society, he can say, well, I'm not all that bad, and get on with his day. So the criminal produces not only textbooks on criminal law, the criminal law itself, and thus legislators, you have to have legislators to pass laws against criminal activity, but also art, literature, novels, okay? For example, the whodunit. The whodunit is a detective story. And it's a very popular form of literature. The criminal also interrupts the monotony and security of bourgeois life. Right? And if it weren't for the criminal, there would be less excitement in the society. Thus, he protects it from stagnation, which of course was exactly the same principle that Hegel used to justify war. In other words, society was becoming totally stagnant and people were totally bored, and so war interrupted the monotony, the doldrums of daily bourgeois life, while Marx says the criminal does the same. Thus, he therefore gives a new impulse to the productive forces. Crime takes off the labor market a portion of the excess population. Well, after all, when a criminal is apprehended, convicted, and put in prison, he's removed from the workforce, you might say, and there's less competition in the workforce for the jobs which are available. Crime takes off the labor portion of the excess population, diminishes competition among workers, and to a certain extent stops wages from falling below a minimum, while the war against crime absorbs another part of the same population, which you need prison guards, you need police, you need parole officers, the whole criminal justice system. While the war, the criminal therefore appears as one of those natural equilibrating forces which establish a just balance and open up a whole perspective of useful, quote, end quote, occupation. The influence of the criminal upon the development of productive forces can be shown in detail, as he said. Would the locksmith's trade have attained its present perfection were it not for thieves? Of course not. Would the manufacture of banknotes have arrived at its present excellence if there were no counterfeiters? If you didn't have counterfeiters, you wouldn't have the recent development of new $100 bills, $50 bills, $20 bills, $10 bills, and even $5 bills, which had that little metallic strip in them to foil the counterfeiter. And they also use a special paper and special inks to foil the counterfeit. Would the microscope have entered ordinary commercial life had there been no forgery? Well, the microscope is an extremely valuable instrument in scientific research, and would it have developed if it were not necessary to examine very closely fingerprints? Is not the development of applied chemistry as much due to the adulteration of wares and the attempts to discover them? Well, think of forensic science, which is an extremely important area in the study of the criminal justice. Is it CSI? There's a whole series of programs on television. I think that's crime scene investigation. And so forensic science, forensic chemistry is an extremely important development in science to counter, again, criminal activity. Crime by its ceaseless development of new means of attacking property. Marx is not in favor of property, for reasons we will see, since it is the ultimate cause of alienation, which we will see next time. And perhaps even a bit today. It's the attacks on property, which of course is what the criminal does, the thief, is okay. So the attacks on property calls into existence new measures of defense, and its productive effects are as great as those of strikes in stimulating the inventions of machines. Well, for example, if you apply for a position in the United States government, they do a criminal background check. And there's the whole business of fingerprinting, which is part of the criminal background check, and also, and anymore, DNA becomes an extremely important investigative tool. So, leaving the sphere of private crime, would there be a world market? Would world nations themselves exist if there had not been national crimes? Again, there's a whole body of not only literature but films. In the 1930s, there were any number of film noir, featuring criminals. Movies by Howard Hawks. I think there's a list. In the 30s, about figures such as John Dillinger, Scarface. I think that's Al Capone. There's a whole series of films. Edward G. Robinson played. James Cagney played some parts. Similar film. And Bonnie and Clyde, they become almost kind of like folk heroes. And of course, in our very own state, we had D.B. Cooper. Right? Remember, he claimed to have a bomb attached to his chest and demanded $250,000, and then leapt out of the back of the plane. And he's kind of a folk hero. They think they found some of the remains of the money. It was marked in the Columbia River area where he may have jumped out of the back end of the plane. But anyway, he's okay. Anyway, let's move along. So for Marx, crime and the criminal, C-R-I-M. Okay. Criminal. The criminal is a productive member of society. Right? This is a product of crime. And of course, that requires the state and the law to counter his activity. Okay. The next section is the next section I don't find particularly interesting for our purposes. So let's get over to page 167. Capitalism and human alienation. Okay. Capitalism, as we saw, capitalism begins when labor becomes a commodity. In other words, something to be sought, something to be bought and sold in the marketplace. When does this happen? Well, it begins in earnest, according to Marx, in the 16th century. However, there are historians of European historians. I think there's a famous Italian by the name of Fanfani, who maintain that actually you can push it back to the 13th century in places like, especially like Venice, where you have the beginnings of capitalism. So, but according to Marx, it begins when labor becomes a commodity to be bought and sold, and certainly by the 16th century, it's in full operation. So, political economy begins with the fact of private property. Okay? The fact of private property. Now, what does capitalism include? Capitalism, as we saw, capitalism includes ownership of the means of production. What else? Capitalism, the means of production, the means of subsistence. Those are also subsistence. The means of production, means of subsistence, raw materials. Again, natural resources are not owned by natural resources are simply, they're in the earth. And it takes labor to turn the natural resource into raw material for production. So, and the capitalists own that. And then, of course, remember, he buys the labor. He doesn't own the labor, but that's part of the labor and capital go together. So there are also capitalism includes and laborers, and it also includes. It's going to mean you're going to have superintendents, shop foremen. Superintendent, shop foreman, and managers. Right? You're going to have managers because remember, the capitalist is basically idle. All he does is supply the capital. He doesn't necessarily know how to produce whatever is produced by the company or the factory. Okay, so political economy begins with the fact of private property. It does not explain it. Down to the bottom. Down to the last sentence of that top paragraph. The only moving forces which political economy recognizes are the lust for gain and the war between seekers after gain and competition. Well, if you remember in Hegel, where does consciousness, or the development of self-consciousness, where does it begin? Well, it begins with desire. Okay? And of course, desire eventually, you're going to have, it's a social thing too. There are going to be others who have similar or the same sort of desire, so you're going to get competition. Right? And we saw that in the fight for recognition, which preceded the master-slave dialectic. Okay, let's move a little further. Over on page 168, he says, private property is therefore the product, the necessary result of alienated labor. Okay? Well, the private property of, that's of course the basis for Hegel's view of political economy. Private property is therefore the product. How is it the product? Well, remember, the capitalist provides capital, the laborer of course, produces value. Labor produces value. And the value comes in two varieties. There's exchange value, and there's also surplus value. Okay? The exchange value is what is produced will buy, basically. And the surplus value is that goes back to the capitalist, which means the capitalist gets richer, and the laborer pretty much stays the same. Since he doesn't own the means of production, he doesn't even own the tools that he has, or the means of subsistence, he doesn't own the raw material. All he has is his labor, which he sells to the capitalist. Private property is therefore the product, the necessary product of alienated labor. Right? Alienated labor, alienation. Remember, there are two forms of alienation in Hegel. Hegel. There is root, there's language. Once I say something, it's out there. And it's alienated from me. I can't take it back. And labor. Okay? The external relation of the worker to nature and to himself. Okay? He's alienated from nature because he doesn't own it. We have there, however, derived the concept of alienated labor from political economy, from an analysis of the movement of private property. Okay, over on page 169, the top paragraph there. Every alienation of man from himself and from nature appears in the relation that he postulates between other men and himself. As we saw, when we were considering Feuerbach, Feuerbach represents the basis for alienation for Marx. And that's why the critique of religion is the basis for all critique. And what did Feuerbach say? Well, we all get together and produce the idea we have of an omnipotent being, because none of us are omnipotent, right? All powerful. But if we all get together, we can do a great deal. Or, what is it? We put together all our knowledge and we have omniscience, knowing everything. Okay. However, once you posit that omnipotent being, right, all of us together producing this, or all that knowledge, you become alienated from that which has been produced by, not you personally, but by humanity. Take it all together. Okay, so this religious alienation is necessarily exemplified in the relation between piety and grace. And since it is here a question of the spiritual world, okay, in the real world of practice, this self-alienation can only be expressed in the real practical relation of man to his fellow man. Okay, he becomes, remember, in selling his labor. Okay? In selling his labor, since labor creates for both Hegel identity, since for both Hegel and Marx, labor creates identity. When I sell my labor, I sell myself. So, in other words, I become self-alienated from myself. Okay? If I sell my labor, I sell myself. Okay? Sell labor, sell self. As I think I mentioned last time, when you write your resume, what you're doing, you're trying to sell yourself to a possible employer. So the medium through which alienation occurs is itself a practical one. The alienation also, what does alienation include? Okay, you're alienated from, well, basically you're alienated from self because you sold yourself to the capital. You're alienated from, there's alienation from self, there's alienation from cultural life. Why? Well, because if you're working 12, 14 hours a day, right, you're not going to have much time to go to a play. You're going to be too tired. Besides, you become alienated from cultural life. Okay, and I'll leave it to say you're alienated also from the means of production. In the guild system, you at least own your tools. You don't own the tools that produce the Ford that's produced at Ford Motor Company. You don't own the means of production. You don't own the means of persist. You're alienated from that because you have to buy that at the local store. In the case of a tightly controlled capitalist system, of the company store. And you're alienated from nature. Feuerbach still had people wandering around in nature enjoying it. For Marx, nature is simply raw material. Which of course explains why Marxist countries could care less about the environment. And in almost every case, there was a serious degradation of the environment associated with countries that adopted Marxist or communist principle. I saw this in Eastern Germany, shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, or shortly after the line between East and West was cut. The environment was a mess, basically. So the medium is, what else? Let's go a little further. Down at the bottom of page 169. In what does this alienation of labor consist? First, that the work is external to the worker. He produces something, an automobile, for example, but it is not part of his nature. And he does not fulfill himself in his work, but denies himself. He does not, the maker of the shoemaker in the Shoemakers Guild produced shoes and he would put his name on the product. No worker in the Ford factory puts his name on the Ford automobile that comes off the assembly line. In other words, it's not part of his nature, and consequently, he does not fulfill himself in his work, but denies himself, has a feeling of misery, not of well-being, and in other words, he takes no pride in what he's produced, in the way that the shoemaker did. Does not develop freely a physical and mental energy, but is physically exhausted and mentally debased. Right? He's physically, at the end of a 14-hour day, or a 10-hour day, you're pretty much beat. Right? And the only thing you can do is go to the local tavern and have a boiler. Okay, I will explain what boiler makers are. That's a technical term. The worker, therefore, feels himself at home only during his leisure, whereas at work he feels homeless. Right? His work is not voluntary, but imposed forced labor. He has to, because he doesn't have the means of subsistence, he doesn't own anything, he has no private property, so he has to, in a way, it's forced labor. It is not the satisfaction of a need, but only the means of satisfying other needs. Okay. Finally, the alienated character of work for the worker appears in the fact that it is not his work, but work for someone else, to whom he is sold his labor. And in the work he does not belong to himself, but to another person. Just a little more on that. The more the worker expends himself in work, the more powerful becomes the world of object which he creates in the face of himself. And the poorer he himself becomes in his inner life. In other words, he has no real cultural, social life other than his labor. And also, by his labor, what he does, since the surplus value goes to the capital gets bigger, and he gets smaller. And he certainly never gets any larger. It is this, the worker puts his life into the object, and his life then becomes no longer to him, but belongs no longer to him, but to the object. Well, anyway, that's enough. We'll see you next Wednesday, and have a happy Passover beginning this evening, or a happy Easter, whichever comes first. Passover. Anyway, this year. So anyway, farewell.